The Golden Grimm by Neon Zangetsu, Chapter 1, Turning the Tables. Impossible, such a silly word. You can't do that. Everyone says it's impossible. They all say something's impossible until someone proves them wrong. I may fall, but I'm still going to try. I was reborn into this world for a reason. Turning the tables. A young man approached the Beowulf in the dead of night. At least he assumed it was a Beowulf. It certainly looked odd enough. He'd spent the last week tracking it. By now the hour was late, and the moon was full, shining down in all its shattered splendor. He knew the beast saw him, just as he saw it. He'd gone out of his way to corner it. His pace did not slow. Any observer would have thought him foolish at best, suicidal at worst. Why else would a stranger willingly seek out a creature of the grim in the dead of night? Surely only a fool would do such a thing, a fool indeed, or a madman. Perhaps he was. For the time he had come to test his theory. There would be no gain without risk, nor risk without gain. Benefit beneath the tattered rags of his well-worn cowl, whiskered cheeks dimpled in an anxious scowl. He didn't think he was mad, just left without much choice. Worst case scenario, he died here tonight. They couldn't only kill him once after all. Perhaps that was a morbid way of thinking things. He knew of no other way to be. No one would miss him in any case. None would mourn him. He was in every way an outcast, a pariah. If he were to die here and now, all his accomplishments would come to naught. His grand plan to save the world destined to die a stillbirth before it could ever be born. His mentor was long since dead. No one else would care about the death of some stray in Vale. They will call you mad for this, Naruto. A memory took him in its teeth and shook him free from head to toe. They will not understand. No, knowing that, are you still prepared to take on this burden? I am. I want to help people. This can save thousands, millions of people. Of course, my boy, of course. You're the perfect vessel. He hadn't backed down then, and he wouldn't back down now. Someone needed to turn the tables. Had to be him. Someone else might have gotten it wrong. By the sage, that was a very large Grimm, easily 10 feet tall on all fours. The Alpha could crush him with one paw. He knew it. The beast knew it. He could fight if it came to that. He wasn't anywhere near as powerless as he appeared, but he didn't favor his chances against a beast of this size, not at this range. Knowing this, the young man still extended his hand. "Hey there, big guy," he grinned at the beast. "Want to be friends?" The tumbleweed blew past man and beast, vanishing in the undergrowth. As if on cue, the Grimm threw its head back and howled. It was a surprisingly sharp sound, a keening contralt against the silent night. "Oops!" His smile became a touch more stressed. "You're a girl, are you? Sorry about that." He laughed and rubbed the back of his head with one hand. "Didn't mean to offend you." Hackles rose as the beast tensed, ready to pounce. Something in the young man quailed at the sight. He grit his teeth and stood his ground, palms still splayed. The Grimms crept closer, slithering jaws parted, exposing row upon row of serrated knife-like teeth. One bite, that was all it would take. A single bite would take his arm and the shoulder besides. He'd be dead before he hit the ground. A whimper nearly stole out of him, but he took hold of it, wrestled it down before it could escape him. And yet, still the young man found himself hesitant. This was his calling, his purpose. He knew this. Every fiber of his being called him to do so. Yet, fear wasn't so easily quashed. Was this a Beowulf at all? Up close, it didn't look like one. He was beginning to think it was a breed he'd not encountered as of yet. That boded poorly. Anxiety stirred deep inside him, drawing a growl from the horrifying abomination before him. "Don't panic," he willed the words at himself, locking his fear in a box and burying it deep. Panic leads to fear. Fear is the enemy. No fear here. The Alpha sniffed his palm once, twice, thrice. A spark of intelligence flashed through the red slits of its mask. He reached out with the gift this world had granted him and breathed on it, fanning that tiny ember into a flame. Faint tendrils of light sprang from his palm, wrapping around the Grimm like strands of silk. It stiffened, but he pushed outwards with his power to pacify it. "Calm." He breathed the word, chanting it like a mantra. Keep calm. He knew the moment his power took root, because the Grimm's fur, once black as pitch, burned a bright shade of deeply luminescent gold. It jerked back with a rough snort of surprise, red eyes wide beneath its mask. A snarl tore through the night, and Naruto felt its shock as clearly as if it were his own. Of course he did. He'd linked himself to the Grimm. Steady, he forced the words out through gritted teeth. Steady now. I'm not going to hurt you. Just be caught. A rough tongue flirted out and scraped across his face, rendering his silver tongue an incoherent mess. Naruto did his best not to gag. His right eye twitched. Good girl, would you kindly sit? Much to his surprise, the beast made a chuffing sound and plonked down on its hindquarters. Rather reminded him of a hound. Well, a giant hound that could take him and shake him apart with its teeth. Irk. Now he was nervous again. Still, it made no move to attack. He tamed it just like the rest. With that, Naruto released the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His shoulders slumped, and against his better judgment, he dared to reach out and scratch the beast's ears. A mighty leg thumped upon the floor as its tongue lolled forth from that fanged maw. Slowly, a tentative smile dawned on his whiskered visage. Well, hot damn, that actually worked. Now what am I going to do with you? The Golden Grimm, he was starting to think of it as a hound, merely cocked its head at him. He hadn't been sure he could successfully influence the higher breeds of Grimm until tonight. Alright then, his theory was proven. His ability extended to Greater Grimm as well as the lesser breeds. That was certainly a step up from what it had been in the beginning. Oh, if only Morlot could see him now, he'd be howling with laughter. His semblance was a strange one. Sometimes he wondered if it was really a semblance to begin with. Anyone who could communicate with Grimm, much less influence them, make them more than they were, well, it had to be a curse. His parents in this life certainly called it such. Was it a curse? A blessing? Some unholy influence, perhaps? He wasn't sure. He had been reborn in this world without aura to protect him, yet he still possessed this strange ability. His soul would always be within, never without. These creatures could and would kill him if he let them. Grimm had sought him for as long as he could remember, attracted him wherever he went. He wasn't sure what it was that drew them to him, only that it did. By the time he realized he was a target, well, things hadn't gone well. Mount Glen was heralded as a disaster for good reason. That day, he'd lost the one man who gave a damn about him. After his mentor's death, he'd eked out a meager existence in the wilds, away from the cities, away from civilization, away from everyone. Still, they were drawn to him. And in a strange, twisted way, Naruto found himself drawn was onto them. They would be reasoned with, pursued not to attack, pressured not to attack, even outright dominated when all else failed. Naruto didn't enjoy the latter, but sometimes it was necessary. Grimm were always dangerous when they were mindless, as this one had been. Give them intelligence, the ability to think and reason, to exist as more than mindless monsters. Well, remarkable things happened. Tame enough Grimm, and they might well leave people alone. Some might call it a pipe dream, perhaps it was, but he'd been given this ability for a reason. Surely he was meant to use it for the greater good. In truth, these beasts were not the mindless monsters man feared them to be. After all, if they were, he would have been long dead by now. If they could learn to act as normal creatures did, if they could be taught, if he was able to find the one directing them, if. So many ifs. Naruto pinched the bridge of his nose and sighed. Enough for one night. His reserves were flagging. All right, he patted the hound on its strange mask. I guess we should get back. Really, you're the first Greater Grimm. I managed to. Bone gave way with an awful crack as the hound howled in untold agony. Naruto jerked back, terrifiedly startled by this unexplained phenomenon. What in the world? Something latched onto his reserves and yanked really, really, really hard. He dropped to a knee, gasping for air. Golden light burst from the beast's shining flood. The clearing, bringing with it a rush of pressure. The young man flung up an arm against it, wincing as his cowl was torn back. Bright blue eyes squinted against the haze, framed by tan whiskered cheeks and a tawny blonde hair. He kept squinting until a hunched shape resolved itself amidst the gloom. He stopped squinting when he saw pale skin. Naked, cheeks aflame, he ripped his battered cloak from his shoulder and cast it over the woman in a desperate attempt to preserve her modesty, for this was undoubtedly one of the fairer sex. When the mist cleared, a young face stared back at him. Not quite human, but certainly not faunus either, framed by the ruined remnants of a broken mask. Around her startled visage, baffled eyes blinked back at him. Her hair was dark, yet a strange shade of red, darker than dark even. Like someone had reached up and cut out a piece of the bloody night itself and wound it into those tresses of hers. Startled silver eyes blinked up at him from a gaunt face that looked like it hadn't seen the sun in years. Naruto recalled. A person? Inside a Grimm? What was the world coming to? Who are you? The hoarse whisper fled from her lips. Mer. He frowned. Didn't quite catch that. She didn't seem to hear him. Instead, the woman raised her hands, then frowned when she realized they were no longer paws. Fingers stood in place of claws, flexing into loose fists as he looked on. An expression of pure wonder crossed her pale visage as she turned them end over end. Her lips worked wordlessly, either unable or unwilling to speak. By some miracle, she didn't try to remove the cloak he'd thrown over her. Trembling hands clutched it close to her naked body, trembling from the cold. Naruto plucked the canteen from his belt and offered it to her. Here, maybe this will help. That got her attention. She all but snatched it from his hands and drank greedily. Thank you. When she finally spoke again, her voice sounded stronger for pure water he'd given her. You saved me. Saved? He scratched the back of his head. I didn't even know you were in that Grimm, miss. Her silver eyes gazed up at him, bright with unshed tears. As he looked on aghast, the woman began to weep. A strange heat pervaded Naruto's face, and he looked away, feeling terribly embarrassed by the sight. When was the last time someone had thanked him? He couldn't remember, really. It hadn't been that long, surely. He liked helping people, and yet he couldn't remember the last time he'd gone out of his way to actively help someone. Maybe it was time that changed. She tried to stand and stumbled, forcing him to catch her. Summer, the woman croaked, clutching at his sleeve for support as she stood on unsteady legs. My name is Summer. Yes, that's it. There was something else. Wasn't there? She swallowed and touched a hand to her forehead, grabbing with a memory. I had a mission. But I can't remember. Something in him winced. He said that the only thing he could. Did you have a family? It was the pebble that startled an avalanche. Realization flashed through her startled silver eyes. Family. The words burst from Summer's lips, and she latched onto him like a limp fingernails bitten in his arm. That's right. I have a family. Please help me. She glanced left and right as though fearing an attack at any moment. Take me home. Don't let her take me again. Her? Salem, she babbled the words and clutched at her head. She took me. Her eyes went wild, flashing with fear and something else he couldn't understand. She did things to me. I don't want to go back. She shook her head anew, sending her hair sprawling in a mess tangle. Take the girl, she said. No. A keening whimper forced itself through clenched teeth. I want to take the girl. I won't give her Ruby. She can't make me. His brow furrowed. Who in blazes is Salem? Summers gazed up at him, suddenly eerily calm. She's the end of everything, Queen of the Grimm. Her eyes rolled back into her head without warning, and she slumped in his arms, forcing him to catch her lest she dashed her head against the stone. Summer offered no resistance whatsoever. Were it not for the faint pulse in her neck, he would have thought her dead. She was certainly cold enough. A bitter breeze swept through the clearing, and Naruto fought down a shiver. There was so much he wanted to ask her, but he'd get no answer from her like this. Grimm weren't people. Were they? Was someone turning humans into Grimm? Another part of him wanted to throw his head back and laugh long and hard. Finally, he'd studied for so long, delved into the depths of Mount Glen, torn through Merlot's research. They said it was impossible, that it couldn't be done. Yet here at last he had his validation, his proof, and most of all, the beginning of his redemption. But with it all, he had a name: Salem, Queen of the Grimm. Oh dear, that complicated things. He knew someone had been directing the Grimm themselves for quite some time now. The attack certainly indicated as much, but he thought in a stray huntress with an ability similar to his, not a bloody queen that wanted to end life as he knew it. If she was doing this to people, then that made her an enemy. She stood directly opposed to his own goals for these Grimm. If anything, she was likely commanding the lot of them. That wouldn't do. With this simple choice, the world began to change once more. He wouldn't be alone anymore, never again. He'd already swore to save this wretched, rotten world one way or another, and he would, even if he had to drag it to glory, kicking and screaming. But in the meantime, guess I'll bring her to her family. Seems the right thing to do. What could possibly go wrong? Previews. Steal the Grimm out from under her. Would he? Impudent pup. He would drown in his own blood for this. Salem scowled. He must be eliminated, Watts. She snapped her fingers. Take Tyrion with you and see to his demise at once. Side. What side? Naruto grit his teeth at the man before him. I'm on humanity's side. This from the man who leads Grimm. Your deeds say otherwise. You're not listening. Stop putting people in Grimm, damn it. The hell am I supposed to do with all these followers? It had been so long, my path so dark, I no longer remember my first name. Well, that's going to be a problem, very much so, in more ways than one. What do I call you? I led a pack. The dusty-skinned woman rose, silver eyes flashing as gazed upon him. Alpha, my name is Alpha. Unfortunately, in standing, she lost the cloak he'd flung over her body. Naruto pinched his brows. Clothes, now, please, wear them. She frowned. Why? Because you're human now? And end of chapter 1.